Welcome to the HBCU podcast. You're listening to episode 41. If you're an avid listener or just joining us for the first time, here we're joined by some awesome HBCU grads in the form of co-host and guest. We also focus on all the great things HBCU alumni are doing all over the world. On this episode, we speak about a scandal that provides further proof that privilege exists in this country. The college admissions scandal, which according to the Justice Department is the largest ever college admissions prosecution. We chat with friend of the podcast and resident admissions expert, Mr. Jeffery Pierce II. He currently serves as Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management at Edward Waters College. This is a topic we really want your feedback on. So keep listening. It's the HBCU podcast. Welcome to the HBCU podcast.
Oh, thanks, Natasha, for having me again. It is such an honor to be here again.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you. It's been a while because you,
Right.
of course, are a friend of the podcast. You've been on before and shared your HBCU experience and your expertise in guest relations and customer service.
Absolutely.
And we greatly appreciate that. And what I guess everybody should know also is that you're also an expert in college admissions as well and enrollment services. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, I've been within admissions and enrollment management for pretty much all 9 years of my higher ed experience. So, yes.
currently, you serve as the Assistant Vice President of Enrollment Services, correct?
Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management, Enrollment Services. Just depends on who.
Okay, and you're now at.
Oh, I'm at Edward Waters College in Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay, so how do you like it there? Because this is a fairly new position, right?
It is a fairly new position. I've been here since February. Florida, similar to Texas, is a hot state. The difference is the heat is more humid here in Florida. So I'm still adjusting to that aspect of the transition. But all in all, everything is well. I'm excited to be here, excited to be a part of the Edward Waters family, and just continue to enjoy giving students an opportunity to pursue their higher education careers.
Well, congratulations on your new role. And of course, if they don't know, if anyone is listening and they're, an alum, you got a good one here because Mr. Jeffery Pierce knows his stuff and will definitely make sure that he's giving all of the opportunities to all of the students who wish to, gain an education at this prestigious HBCU. So if you're ever on campus, make sure you holler at him and, try to coordinate how you can get more students to your alma mater.
Thanks for those words, Natasha. Absolutely. We need you guys to help us with recruitment. So anything that you can do to assist, we kindly welcome that.
If you're listening and you have been listening, we've been on a bit of a hiatus. And of course, when all the news broke of this large college admission scandal, a few people kind of, reached out to me, hit me up and said, are you going to talk about it? And I really wanted to at the time where it was a lot more timely, but, life kind of got in the way. But it's something I didn't want to glaze over because I think it's one of those things that it never really kind of strikes in the HBCU community, but it seemed to be surprising to a lot of people, not just in the HBCU community, but college community in general. So if you guys are wondering what we're talking about, we are talking about in March, the Justice Department called this the largest ever college admissions prosecution. Federal authorities charged 50 people with taking part in a nationwide scheme to game the admissions process. We're talking about millions in dollars in bribes, exam administrators, athletic coaches accused of manufacturing students' achievements, and private admissions counselors even. according to the stories, they were helping coordinate it all.
We're learning explosive new details about the largest college admission scam prosecuted by the Department of Justice ever. Prosecutors say 50 people are being charged nationwide in connection with a $25 million cheating scheme designed to get students into elite universities. Much of the indictment ties to William Rick Singer, the founder of a for-profit counseling and preparation business called The Key. He just arrived to a federal court in Boston. Officials say his scheme was twofold: helping students cheat on college entrance exams and paying bribes to get kids into schools with fake athletic credentials.
With respect to the SAT and ACT scheme, numerous parents paid Singer between $15,000 and $75,000 to have someone either take the exam for their child or to correct their child's answers afterward, all to achieve a sufficiently high pre-agreed score on those tests. Singer counseled parents to take their children to a therapist and get a letter saying that because of purported learning disabilities or other issues, the child needed additional time to complete the ACT or the SAT. Parents also paid Singer money that he then used to bribe coaches and administrators to designate their children as recruited athletes for various schools. Singer worked with the parents to fabricate impressive athletic profiles for their kids, including fake athletic credentials or honors, or fake participation in elite club teams. In many instances, Singer helped parents take staged photographs of their children engaged in particular sports.
Of course, as I said before, we're talking to Mr. Jefferey Pierce, and he is an expert in enrollment management, enrollment services. And we're just going to kind of pick this a little bit apart, because when I heard about it, I was like, wow, I heard things like this happened, but I didn't know to this extent.
It's unfortunate. It's unethical, and in my viewpoint, it's unacceptable. This scandal that you're referring to, they've named it Operation Varsity Blues, and just to kind of dive a little bit deeper, it's unfortunate from the standpoint in terms of some of these students are now finding out their parents paid money to get them in school, and that impacts them mentally. I presume that there are some kids that knew what their parents were doing, specifically those, who created fraudulent athletic profiles. But for those that didn't, it's very unfortunate, because their parents, it seems to look though as their parents care more about others' opinions of their kids than they do about the mental well-being of their own kids, right? So very unfortunate from that standpoint. Even unethical, just from the coaches, the admissions counselors, that was accused of coordinating it all, the parents, the administrators. It's inexcusable as well. There's just no excuse to justify the actions of these parents. I mean, it's obvious that they use their wealth to, and I'll say it, they stole admission spots. They stole admission spots from students who truly were qualified to gain admissions into these elite, highly selective institutions, whether it be from being qualified academically or being qualified athletically. Because as I mentioned before, some of these parents went to the extreme of creating fraudulent athletic profiles.
They were not Facebook, photoshopping photographs, and they were placed into their admissions file or something, apparently. That's really, first of all, that's really ballsy, because if you do happen to follow sports at all and you never ever see that person's face on the playing field or whatever the case may be, they didn't think that would come up.
Right. So I thought that was very extreme, especially being a former college athlete myself, and having gone through the the recruitment process, of speaking with a coach. And I just thought, as you mentioned, that was just a little fishy in terms of just being able to submit a profile and gaining a spot on an athletic team, not just a college athletic team, and without ever playing the sport. I just thought that was really, really weird and fishy. It even reveals a bigger undertone of, what we see in life, and that's, some people will go
Whatever
to
it
the extreme
takes.
of doing whatever it takes. Yeah, just to get to the top, even if it's at the expense of, someone else. So very, very unfortunate, unethical, and unacceptable.
Now, just to give people a little bit more meat into the story, because I know a lot of people, they just really focused on, hey, Aunt Becky got caught trying to get her kids in school.
Right.
They also, Felicity Huffman was also one of the people who was named in the scandal, and she's also a popular actress. But we really need to focus, not move the focus from her, because they're very guilty in this, but really focus on a man who has been doing this for about 20 plus years.
Yeah.
The man is Rick Singer. And he's the man behind the admission scandal. Apparently, he was running a company that he called a nonprofit called Edge College and Career Network. And this was basically just a single enterprise that helped students cheat on standardized tests. It helped pay for bribes, to bribe athletic coaches and sometimes admissions counselors. Rick basically he bragged about this being a side door that he created, aka cheating. He also mentions that the back door, okay, because I'm pointing this out because this is what's been said. The back door, which is still not the front,
Right.
is through institutional advancement. He says that institutional advancement is a route, but it usually will cost you 10 times more. So both of us, being from a higher education background, and you, of course, spending more of a career there than I did myself. But when I did work in an HBCU and at a college, I worked under the institutional advancement umbrella. And so that's public relations. And of course, that's your alumni relations. And that's usually where people would make donations to their college. So that, while not necessarily the ethical way to get into college either, but it seems like it's somewhat more acceptable to people to have a building named. And of course, now Jonathan gets to go here. But so that is just a little bit of it. But what I did want to jump back to, because I'm connecting the dots as you speak,
Right.
that you're way more, you're way more involved in this, and you know a little bit more about this than I would. But talk a little bit about what the athletic, because you were a college athlete too, what does that process look like from, I guess, the time that a coach is, starting to look at you from high school, and what should that look like to get into the front door appropriately?
Right. So, for one, it starts with coming to watch the talent in the flesh, right? That's one way, or it could even be, watching film on said talent. So that process begins with the coach actually seeing that talent perform live, or even seeing that talent perform at a showcase. Where the talent goes through a number of drills and scenarios just to kind of give that coach a little more insight as to what type of player they are potentially recruiting. So that's the starting process. And then from there, it transitions into the academic requirements. So even though I was being recruited for an athletic purpose, there was still that academic requirement that needed to be fulfilled to get into the front door, if you will, of the institution. So it was a very simple process. So I met the requirements of what the coach was looking for from an athletic standpoint. And then from there, I also met the requirements of the institution from an academic standpoint that allowed me to get access or gain entrance or admissions into the institution.
So, in other words, even with your student athletes, of course, they're still required to make sure they have an SAT, ACT score. They are held to the same academic standards, but they just have a different a scholarship or different funds available to them because of their athletic prowess.
Right, absolutely, and that process can also vary according to the institution. Whether it be an NAIA institution, an NCAA Division II, NCAA Division I, highly selective, medium selective, large, small. That process does vary according to that institution. However, I do believe that there are things that institutions can put in place that can prevent, such atrocious, unethical behavior from happening in that admissions process, whether it be through athletics or whether it be through strictly a student who's just coming in through the front door academically.
And that was going to be one of my questions to you as well. I had no idea that it was so easy. And because the way that I even heard, I did a little bit of research regarding how he exactly got this done. Because I know when I was going to school, I took the SAT, I took the ACT, I took the GMAT, the GRE, what have you. Those standardized tests are like locked down. Right. For me, I was trying to figure out how exactly was this happening. And so apparently, the Rick Singer, he is friends with
a big loophole. He found a big one. Go ahead.
He found a huge loophole, right? So apparently he found two people with schools, two of his friends. He had a school, and then so did one of his other friends had a private school. And he told the parents, and I read a transcript that he asked them if you could get your daughter, or you could put in to get your son or daughter more time because of a quote unquote learning disability or the way that they learn, then they will have days to take the test as opposed to hours like most students, and then say that you're going out of town and you won't be around to have them take the test at their local high school, but another school where they can take their test. And apparently there was a school of his in Houston where he liked to have testing happen, and then there was a West Hollywood location that they had for people to take tests. And here the kids would not take the test. I'm not sure if they pretended as if they took it, but the final answers that were turned in were through a proctor that was also paid to make sure that they landed on the score that they wanted. So as I took all of this in, I was just overwhelmed with just how far they went.
Right. And in some instances, some of the students knew about what their parents were doing, right? And some students didn't know, which kind of brings up another piece is, what type of punishment, if any, do you give to the students, right? There are some students, again, like I said, they knew that their parents were involved in creating this fraud or this scandal to help gain them admission into these institutions. So there should be, in my opinion, some type of penalty for those students. But then again, you have those students who had no idea of what their parents were doing because as you read more into the story, some parents just paid at minimum $15,000 just to have the scores changed after the student indeed took the exam. So in those cases, the students may not have known exactly what was taking place. So do you penalize those students? And then furthermore, you have those students who have graduated, right? Because This has happened
Right. For
for
20
some
something
time.
years now.
So there are some students who've gained admissions into these institutions as a result of cheating or being labeled as an athlete, who have gone on to graduate, and in some cases have received state licenses,
They could be
and
one
are
of our
far into
doctors.
their career. Right, absolutely. So so you bring up, you just open up this entire can, in terms of, what should be done as a result of all of this information coming out now.
Well, it looks like the hard part about all of this is because some of the schools that were being named, a few are Ivy League, some of them just top tier schools. Nobody from the schools are really going are saying much about it, because
Yeah.
honestly, if he's been doing this for about 20 years, there is definitely students that have graduated, who have matriculated, who have received
Right.
degrees, and either the school was none the wiser, or maybe they did realize it and moved forward. We don't know, but I did read that USC is not identifying past, present, or potential students involved in the scheme. Of course, they're not saying their names. They're citing the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act that
Right.
says their information can't be released without prior consent from the student. So a lot of schools are on that side. Of course, they're not saying anything. Internally, they probably have found more information about this, but of course, if they were to say more about it, it really risked their reputation
Right. Right.
more. So unfortunately, I think it has really highlighted that this is something that happens and we should be aware, but I don't foresee anybody aside from the parents and the person who was running the scheme and the coaches being reprimanded. I don't think any students will be, because they could all claim that they had no idea.
True enough. True enough.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit though about, because you're in the world of admissions, okay? So
Hmm.
how exactly, because people went so far, or their parents and or students went so far into this with the test scores. That's just the one thing that I was really baffled by. The money thing did not really surprise me much,
Yeah.
but the test scoring, especially with, the College Board, being this long-standing organization, institution, who we've all trusted and of course have been annoyed by, depending on how many times you've had to take a test.
Right.
But how exactly do those test scores, and how much do they really factor into admissions? And I know it varies from school to school, but just in your experience, how does that shake out?
Yeah, you mentioned it perfectly, when you said, it varies from school to school. But within my experience, one thing that we've tried to do, or that I've tried to do, at various institutions, is look a little bit more deeper than the test score, because all of my experience has been with HBCUs, and oftentimes students do not have the highest of test scores. That's not a slight on our institutions, but we look a little bit deeper to see, okay, those students whose scores may not be as high, they still progress through and matriculate and graduate and go on to be outstanding citizens. So one thing that I do, that I like to take a look at is, okay, let's get an average of the students who enroll and what their average test score is, right? And those students, once we look at those test scores, we see what is the retention rate of those students who who make a certain score, and also what is their high school GPA coming out of high school. And that can give you a better idea in terms of the success of a student. Oftentimes, or when I first got into higher education, it was talked about a lot that, oh, the success of a student is dependent upon their test scores. Well, as I've kind of grown and matured within the field, I've learned that it's more than the test scores. Their high school GPA, there's test scores, there's also coupled with geographic location. Those things can play a large part into predicting or determining the success of a student. So from my experience, I don't like to look solely on the test score in terms of if a student is a good candidate for the particular institution. I like to take a deeper look at, their high school GPA, the courses that they've taken, and how successful they were in those courses, to determine how good of a student they are. All staying within policy of the institution in terms of
Absolutely.
the admissions requirements. So that's what I like to do, as it relates to those test scores.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, and I'm glad you lifted up that you kind of just look at them overall as a well-rounded student, because what I've also read into is the fact that, of course, this test has been administered since 1926. There has been a lot of science and research to come out to say that it is racially biased, or has the tendency to be, bringing up experiences that people from certain backgrounds and races may not have, and that is accumulated into the score. And so even recently, I think there was a young lady out of Florida, Miami, who was told that her test scores were invalid because she improved her score by about, I think, 400 or so points. And she claimed, she studied really hard for it. Again, just so that she could raise her scores. Now, they never did honor the score that she actually received. They just flagged the score, and they said if she, took the test again and she got that score or exceeded it, they would honor it. But since then, I believe the young lady decided not to retake the test and essentially was kind of forced into it. So I think this type of scandal also makes us all kind of start to look at College Board or ETS, and it's time to shine a light on their practices and what they're doing.
Absolutely.
Not just hard, but just not qualifying students appropriately.
Biased.
Correct.
Yeah. Not only just the testing agencies, but even the institutions as well. I just think that there needs to be a process put in place that, like I said before, just protects us from this unethical behavior, even from the College Board and SAT
Because essentially,
standpoint.
who's watching them?
Right, right. So, internal audits, external audits, just to verify and cross-reference that their practices and their processes are indeed, air quotes, fair, if you will, or in line to give, each student who takes those exams the opportunity to, have that information passed on. So I just really think that there needs to be some processes in place, as you mentioned, to watch them and also to safeguard those unethical behaviors.
Hopefully that's something that we'll see, because there's been I think this whole scandal has like shaken all of that to its core, and it's almost like, are we really paying you guys to take these tests? One, two, you're putting people in and out of college based on these test scores, and three, who is watching this whole system, because obviously someone has been able to game it.
Right, right.
Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit more about admissions, because I know here on the HBCU podcast, I'm always encouraging people, go to college, go to an HBCU. And,
Amen.
we're always talking about, admissions. And for those who might be first generation college students, or just don't know about the whole admissions process, in some schools, in some high schools, we do have counselors who are, doing that work and making sure the process is understood. And there are a bunch of organizations that are making sure the process is understood by doing things in the summertime, like bringing them to the schools, introducing them to counselors, giving them, tours, etc. But for those who may not be familiar with the admissions process, do you have just like a few things that you can share that most definitely should be looking for, and then anything that they might see that might raise any red flags when it comes to the admissions process?
Well, for one, FAFSA, FAFSA. One thing that I have seen over the years is just the lack of financial literacy for students who are thinking about going to college, or planning to go to college, is just the lack of financial literacy as it relates to how to pay for college. So I definitely encourage, when starting out that admissions process, fill out the FAFSA, speak with your high school counselor to learn more information about that, as well as speak with the financial aid office of the institution or institutions that you're considering to attend. And I tell students all the time, press them for the information. They are the experts. And sometimes, we as professionals, we may not intentionally do it, but we may not give all of the information that someone needs. So I encourage students and tell families all the time, press them to get the information that you need. If you do not understand, the FAFSA and its process and everything that comes with it, just continue to ask, and don't allow just a simple answer or a simple response to kind of push you away. Because ultimately, when we're speaking about the affordability and paying for college, there's student loans involved with that, and we're talking about, having to repay those student loans. So the first thing I would say with the admissions process is having a really good understanding of the financial literacy piece around it and submitting that FAFSA. The other thing when it comes to the admissions process is very similar to this scandal. Parents pay for private counselors. There are tons of free information out there that can help guide you on the admissions process. And if you do not, I kindly urge or highly urge, families, not to pay for those services, because the information is out there. There's this one thing that I firmly believe on, and it's, information is free. You just have to put in the time and the energy to seek that information. So definitely start with that FAFSA, press those counselors, those professionals on how to understand that process, and then begin to, look at the free information out there as it relates to how to navigate the admissions process.
Gotcha. Good advice. And as far as red flags, anything that people should, be aware of?
Absolutely. Stand firm on your morals and your ethics and your beliefs. Because as we know, like you mentioned in this case, there are things that people can say that may sound good, but having a strong set of morals, values, and beliefs, and staying firm on those will allow you to be very aware when you engage with, these individuals who may be pitching an unethical practice to you. So definitely standing strong on those.
Nice. So great advice. You heard it here. You heard it from an expert in admissions and enrollment. So I want to talk a little bit more about admissions. For me, I've only probably heard anything remotely related to legacy and legacy admissions when it comes to Greek life.
Okay.
I have not heard or know of anyone in my personal circle who has benefited from the college standpoint. So how does that work? And have you come into contact with anyone who has mentioned it, benefited, etc.?
Yeah. So with my experience at our HBCUs, there isn't anything specifically related to legacy admissions, and I haven't had any direct experience with that. However, just from meeting and engaging with individuals who do not work at HBCUs, larger research, tier one, highly selective institutions, I did learn that some of those schools in their application process, they do ask,
Oh.
if you are a legacy student.
Oh, wow.
And in some of those admissions processes, it is a holistic approach in terms of how they select students. So they're not only looking at the students. I mean, it's a deeper dive. They're looking at the students' academic GPA. They're looking at their test scores. They're looking at the rigor of the courses that they've taken. They're looking at the school district, the high school in which they attended, extracurricular activities. They look at the essay. They want to know if the student is a legacy student or not. But they're in those instances, they have more of a holistic review process, which just kind of goes into something that I've often heard, in terms of, how do you know what is a good admissions process, right? And
Because I'm side-eyeing a legacy admissions process, honestly.
right now, just to touch on that briefly, it's factored into it. Not that it is
The go-ahead, the end-all, be-all.
right, the end-all, be-all. But I believe, what is a good process is pretty much determined by a particular institution. You know what I'm saying? And the requirements that, they set to attract the students that they desire to be on their campus. Which takes me a little bit further to just kind of pose a question to, the enrollment management professionals in terms of, what's fair and what's right. And it just kind of takes me back to something that I mentioned before. How do we protect our processes from being a suspect to this behavior?
Right.
Right. And I think it is something that we as experts and professionals have to really take a closer look at, just to ensure that we are safeguarding our processes from such scandals.
I absolutely agree. And the reason why I mentioned what I mentioned when it comes to legacy admissions, and whether or not people do that or not, I actually don't doubt that it happens on HBCU campuses, just to be absolutely honest, because even though there's probably not an application that asks you to check it, that if your grandmother went there and they were, alums, and depending on the size of your school, there are people who know or hear a name and, try to follow the breadcrumbs. And
Right.
so, there are some people who are there and will tell you, oh, my grandfather went here, my grandmother went here, my mom went here, my dad went here. And while I highly doubt it factors in the same way that it has at some of these other institutions, I still call it somewhat unfair and biased because of the first generation college student, the numbers that we have, especially in the African American community. I think that is one of those things that's also put in place that could also be biased, whether it's happening on a predominantly white institution's campus or an HBCU campus, because you're going to have people who have shown up for the first time as a representative of their family, and no one else in their family has ever walked these halls or made that step. So if legacy admissions are considered, it seems unfair.
Well, and let me say this: like I mentioned before, I haven't had direct experience with that, but I have heard of cases in which, someone has mentioned, well, my sister went here, or my brother went here, or my mom or my dad. But in those particular situations, at the end of the day, those students did meet the
The requirements.
admission requirements to gain entrance.
Right.
I think that's an important piece to kind of point out. And this scenario that I'm speaking of, was with an HBCU, just having a conversation with a colleague. But I think the biggest piece there was this. Although legacy was mentioned, the student did meet the requirements to the institution. I can agree with you in terms of if legacy ends up being an end all be all, and the student doesn't meet the requirements for that institution. That would then be a problem. It'd be very problematic. So.
According to the Inside Higher Ed, nearly half of the nation's private colleges and 6% of the public ones consider legacy status when mulling student applications. So that was a survey that was done, I believe, last year, and then it was featured in their publication. So it is something that is considered.
Absolutely, it is.
But I'm wondering how long this has been happening and how long have the particular admissions counselors, coaches, and just the people in enrollment who were privy to this have let this go on, and to the tune of how much? Because that's the information that I have not been able to find in my research, exactly how much people were being paid to turn a blind eye to these fake and photoshopped profiles. And
gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there were, in total, over the years in which these bribes and these things have been occurring, upwards of $25 million. There have been some instances where a coach received $600,000 to participate in this particular scandal. And that coach was the head selling coach at Stanford. And actually, he was the first to be sentenced, which was last week, Wednesday. And his sentence, and I am going to, and I remember this, and I'll listen for your reaction. But his sentence was 1 day in prison and 2 years of monitored supervision of some sort and 6 months of home confinement. And this particular coach received $600,000. Now, in an article that I read, it was mentioned that the judge was a bit lenient on this particular sentence because the $600,000 that this coach received, he did not pocket any of it for his own personal gain. But that was the first of many sentences that will come. And this was last Wednesday. There have been an instance where I believe the head women's soccer coach at Yale received $400,000.
Wow.
For a bribe. Go ahead.
So that was a slap on the wrist. And where exactly was where he didn't pocket it, so he put it into the program, or
he put it directly into the program. Yeah. Yeah. So a slap on the wrist. So that has had a number of the attorneys of the defendants. Some of them feel as if that was a win because they are thinking that will be that's the tone of which the sentences that are coming in the future.
That's how they're going to all trickle down. Like no jail time.
Right. So, which, as I mentioned before, is highly unfortunate because these parents really behaved in a manner in which they stole admission spots from students who worked really hard to achieve a certain level of academic success, achieve a certain level on these standardized tests, only to be robbed of an admissions decision merely because their family didn't have the means to spend such money get them entrance into that institution.
It's baffling. I mean, as you said, that again, that's a slap on the wrist, because it comes down to ethics. Okay, so you didn't pocket the money, but you knew that this was happening.
Absolutely.
And you said nothing, and your program gained from it, your ego, your reputation as a coach, I guess, maybe all those things is what he gained from it. I don't know, but the two popular people who this case has been really, sensationalized around, Lori Loughlin and Felicity Huffman. Loughlin, she's not going to be sentenced until September. So I guess she's still negotiating. Her prosecutors are recommending at least 4 months in prison. And Felicity Huffman came out, and I think she led the cops, or the FBI arrest her. She apologized for it, so essentially kind of admitted to it. But
Right,
she was one of the ones whose kids did not know that she was doing what she was doing to help them. The other lady, her kid knew and didn't really want to go to college anyway.
Right. and has been on YouTube, mentioning how, she didn't really want to go to college, and that she was just there for the parties and the fun and the excitement. So I think that, at the time when she put that video out, I don't believe she knew the ramifications of that and how that could allegedly be tied back to this scandal.
Right. Well, at the end of the day, this whole thing is definitely something I just wanted to weigh in on and speak to someone who had the experience that you do have when it comes to all of this. So my last thing here, just opinions on where you see all of this going and wrapping up, because there, of course, as you mentioned, still some sentencing predictions. What do you see happening as this all shakes out for any of these individuals who are involved? Because it's more than 50 individuals who have been named, who have, tried to use the back door, the side door to get their students in.
I'll say what I would like to see, and then I'll transition into, what may happen, what I think may realistically happen. But I would like to see an example made to let everyone know that it's unacceptable. These individuals that were involved in this, they really sat down and planned this out to ensure the best way that they could get students in or their kids into college. So I would like there to be, an example made of these individuals. As I mentioned before, we see that these individuals obviously use their wealth to have their kids receive admissions into these institutions. And realistically speaking, just wondering if that same wealth will come into play as it relates to the sentencing that they may receive. So I just kind of threw it out there in that context. But I would like to see an example made, because it is just totally unacceptable, unethical, unfortunate, and even unfair for all of those students who actually applied and went about it the right way of gaining admissions that were denied admissions. But ultimately, I do believe that their wealth will have some factor into how they're sentenced.
Yeah, I agree. Just kind of wrapping up predictions. Of course, like I mentioned before, this has been very sensationalized because of two of the actresses that are involved. And so I see the sentencing not being fair at all. Okay. Because I think what the judge or whoever is sentencing their lawyers, they're going to paint it as though there were no drugs involved, no one was killed, that kind of thing. And so it's going to be like a slap on the wrist. It's not going. I don't think it's going to be that serious.
As we saw with last week.
Absolutely. Somebody may have to pay some money back. Maybe they won't. As a matter of fact, most of them, and they should have to pay money back. Here's why. Because with Rick's particular nonprofit, which we obviously know he profited from, he gave them tax write-offs. So they received tax write-offs for their quote-unquote contributions to his nonprofit, which essentially was them paying to have their kid
for the services,
enrolled. So I think there should be some sort of restitution or something like that. I don't see it happening, but I think there should be. And so I think everybody's going to get off with light sentencing. This will be something that we're probably not talking about even 4 years from now. I also see Lifetime probably trying to turn it into a movie in some sort of way.
Yeah.
And I've seen that already kind of like floating around, that apparently a mini series is being shopped around about the scandal. But honestly, I don't see anything really happening, not even from the standpoint of the colleges and the students being taken out of those schools. I see a lot of them being sued already. There are some students who said, or who went somewhere else and they were trying to get into Stanford at a time, and they're alleging that maybe this cheating scandal held them back from getting into the school the proper way. And so there are some lawsuits happening there. But I mean, you would have to have deep pockets to want to even enter into that whole arena.
Yeah. And there are some schools that have mentioned that they will conduct some type of internal investigation to see if there are students who gained admission, or if they are currently in the admissions process as a result of this scandal. So some schools are prepared or are preparing to put together some type of action in place in the event that they find a student benefited from this scandal.
Yeah, so it'll be just interesting to watch. But
yeah,
in the meantime, we definitely will keep our eyes peeled. Of course, everyone who's listening here, if you do have some sort of commentary, you have anything to say, if you know about anything that maybe we didn't mention, feel free to share it with us by going to our Twitter, our Facebook, our Instagram, and leaving us a comment, or just telling us flat out how you feel about it. We can be found at the HBCU Podcast. And of course, today, our resident expert and good friend of the podcast, again, is Mr. Jeffery Pierce here, an expert in college admissions and enrollment, guest relations, customer service. I'm not sure what he doesn't do, but he is the expert. So, Jeffery, thank you for being here, but tell everyone where they can find you and they can find more information about just everything that you do.
All right. Thanks again, Natasha. So again, you can follow my Instagram. My Instagram is I am pro dev, and that is short for I am professional development. You can learn more information about customer service by going to www.parallelinception.com to learn more about my philosophy as it relates to customer service. And ultimately, you can find me on the campus of Edward Waters College in beautiful Jacksonville, Florida, where our president says we are the destination institution of emerging eminence.
Hey.
So that's where you can find me. And again, Natasha, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Of course, always. So, guys, you heard it here. Make sure you go check out that information. That is the best way to find our resident expert. And also, he is at one of our finest HBCUs in the country. So, make sure if you're interested, you have a cousin, a sister, a brother who is looking into higher education. Make sure you definitely go check out Edward Waters. Tell them the HBCU podcast sent you. All right. So that wraps it up. Again, you can find us at thehbcupodcast.com. That is the same across all of our handles, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and of course, we're on YouTube as well. So make sure you hit subscribe. You can also listen to all of the episodes there. If you're trying to share our podcast with a friend, we can be found on all podcasting platforms. If you name it, we're there. So again, thank you, Jeff, for being here with us. Thank you for your wisdom, your expertise, and that is it.
Thanks again.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for listening to the HBCU podcast. We have so much more HBCU content on the way, so make sure you subscribe to the podcast, rate the podcast, and visit us at thehbcupodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and Twitter at the HBCU Podcast. Like us on Facebook. We love you for listening. Until next time.